Thank you, Jamie, for that lovely introduction. What we do at the Bridge is we try to create connections, as we just heard from Jamie. Connections to people who perhaps don't know much about each other, don't share the same perspective. Connections to organizations that are trying to figure out how to talk about race and identity, and also connections to our past. Because we need to better understand our past, particularly when it comes to race and American identity, so we can figure out how to move forward boldly. And we have someone today with us who is going to help us do just that. My dear friend, Clarence Jones. He has a really big, long resume. He is presently an adjunct professor at the University of California, San Francisco. He created a very important study for the Center of Martin Luther King and American History at Stanford University. He is the person who secreted scraps of paper that Martin Luther King scribbled notes on that eventually became the letter from a Birmingham jail. It was Clarence, who was visiting Dr. King, who took those pieces of paper out of the jail and into an office where they would have to put them together almost like a jigsaw puzzle. He was a person who helped Dr. Martin Luther King write many of the speeches that you know so well. He was a close friend and an advisor. He has lived history, and he is at a point in his life where he wants to share that history with others. What is it that Clarence says? If the lions don't tell their stories, the hunters get all the credit. So I would like to introduce my dear friend Clarence Jones. He's entering from the back of the room. Clarence Jones.
I woke up this morning with my mind set on freedom. I woke up this morning with my mind set on freedom. I woke up this morning with my mind set on freedom. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. Oh, freedom, oh, freedom, oh, freedom over me. And before I'll be a slave, I'll be buried in a grave. 32 years old. And be buried in my grave and go home to my master and be free. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Now, it would not be possible, appropriate, legitimate, or authentic if I came and spoke to you about the legacy of this extraordinary man, if I didn't share with you some of those freedom and gospel songs that became such a daily menu of our movement. Can we sit?
We may.
Okay.
This man knows how to make an entrance.
Now, I know my beloved goddaughter, I call her, is going to ask me we're going to start a discussion, but I want to frame the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr. for you before we get into our discussion. And I will frame it by simply saying this. In 12 years and 4 months, from 1956 at April 4th, 1968, the date of his assassination, with the exception of the Emancipation Proclamation of 1863 and the presidency of Abraham Lincoln, Martin Luther King Jr. may have done more to achieve political, social, racial justice and equality in the United States than any other event or person in the 240-year history of the United States of America. He was a bad dude.
Clarence B. Jones, the same could be said of you.
Well, I'm honored to be in the same company.
We're going to talk today
Right.
about your experience working alongside Dr. King, and also about the moment that we find ourselves in today. We are at a very divided moment in America. There are lessons that we can take from the leadership in the civil rights movement. There are also cautionary lessons that we should understand. And so I want to talk in the pluperfect, I guess. We're going to talk about the past and the present. But to begin, help us understand how you came to know the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. You were a young lawyer.
I was a young lawyer starting a career in entertainment law, intellectual property. I went to Boston University Law School, and by virtue of having gotten the highest mark in copyright law and intellectual property law, my professor, who was very close to, at that time, the General Counsel of Review Productions here in California, in California, but not here in California, suggested I might consider, would I consider moving to California to take a position if I could. And anyway, bottom line, he arranged it, so I moved to California. And so I was there only in California for about 6.5 months when one Thursday evening, about the first week in February 1960, a distinguished judge in New York by the name of Judge Hubert Delaney called me up and said, you know, Clarence, this Negro preacher, you know, Martin Luther King Jr., you know, the Montgomery bus boycott, et cetera, he's been indicted by the state of Alabama for tax evasion, and I'm his chief defense counsel, and I have 3 other superb lawyers working along with me, 2 African-American tax lawyers from Chicago and a young lawyer in Montgomery, Alabama by the name of Fred Gray. But I need you to come and be my law clerk and coordinate the legal research, preparation, and defense. So when he first spoke to me, I thought he was talking about, you know, going to the law library and, you know, doing some research. It's 1960 now, you know. And he said, no, Clarence, I need you to, you need to go to Montgomery and work in a law office. And I said, Judge, you know, I'm sorry, I cannot do that. And he was really, really disappointed. And it was very, very difficult for me to say no to him. So the next morning, Friday morning, I get a call from Judge Delaney again. And it's like very early in the morning, California time. And he says, you know, I didn't know it, Clarence, at the time of our conversation last night, but Dr. King is in the air. He's on his way to California right now. And I told him to take advantage of the change in time. He's going to land about 11:45 in the morning, California time. I told him the very first thing he should do is come up and see you. And I gave him all, and I thought to myself, oh, no. So Friday evening, at my doorbell was Martin Luther King Jr. And out of California, he comes in with a man by the name of Reverend Bernard Lee, sits down at the coffee table, Howson, and he gets right to the point after some pleasantries. He says, you know, Mr. Jones, we have lots of white lawyers, particularly lots of young white lawyers from the Midwest and from the Northeast who help us in our various legal cases. But what we need, Mr. Jones, we need young Negro lawyers, or Negro lawyer like you, to help me and our people as we're struggling for freedom in the South. So I said, Dr. King, I am in such admiration of everything you're doing. And I wish I could help you, but I simply cannot go. And he was crestfallen. And so he asked me some questions about myself. And I said, well, you know, I mean, I was only child of a domestic living household servants. My mother was a maid and a cook. My father was a chauffeur and a gardener. Until the age of 6, I lived in the servants' quarters of the house in which they worked for. And then at the age of 6, they put me in a Catholic boarding school where from 6 to 14, I was raised by white Irish scholars, Catholic nuns. That's short of it. You know? And I told them that some other things. My mother never saw me, although I was a valedictorian of my class, high school class. And got an academic scholarship to go to Columbia College. My mother never saw me graduate from college. She never saw me graduate from law school because she died in my beginning of my third year in college. So talking about, and he leaves. Now my wife, who's deceased at the time, she turns to me and she says, "What do you think you are doing that's so important?"
Wives have a way of doing that.
"What do you think you are doing? It's so important that you can't help this man that came all this distance to see you." And I said, "Ann," her name was Ann, "that is simply not true." I got into when I write about it, into my lawyer's bag. I simply said, "He has a speaking engagement in Los Angeles. And Judge Delaney thought since he was going to be out here, he should stop by and see me. But he did not travel all the way from the East just to see me and ask for my assistance. And besides," I said, "just because some Negro preacher got his hand caught the cookie jar stealing, that ain't my problem."
You did not say that.
Oh, yes, I did.
Oh.
And I even went further and said if he wasn't guilty, he would have been indicted. My wife said to me, "I don't believe you, you're lawyers, but that's how I feel." Well, as I write about my book, that was a cold night in the Jones household. The next morning, very early Saturday morning, I get another phone call. The voice on the other end of the phone is dripping, saccharine with honey. "Mr. Jones, yes." "My name is Dora McDonald." "Yes." "I am Dr. King's personal secretary." "Yes." "Mr. Jones, he forgot to invite you to be his guest tomorrow. He's preaching as a guest student." So I took the information down, and so I go over. Now, I've never seen or heard Dr. King speak before. So he's speaking at a Baptist church, the presiding minister, Reverend H.B. Charles. And it's about a 1,300-seat church at least, and I'm sitting about 1/3 from the distance from the pulpit. Dr. King gets up after he's introduced by the pastor. "Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, the text of my sermon tonight is the role and responsibility of the Negro professional to aid our less fortunate brothers and sisters who are struggling for their freedom in the South." So I thought to myself, this is an appropriate thing to say. Now, I had never seen or heard him speak. I saw pictures on television, never saw any human being with 2 legs and arms and a head. No, never saw anybody speak like that before. It was, powerful, mesmerizing. And then, and in his sermon, he talked about some of the things we had talked about in my home on Thursday night, but in much more detail and texture about what he was doing in the South. And then he pauses and he says, "And for example," "there's a young man sitting in this church today. My friends in New York, for whom I have great respect, my friends in New York tell me this young man, a young lawyer, they tell me that this young man's brains have been touched by Jesus." And then he continues, "And they tell me that when this young man goes and does legal research on any problem, he goes all the way back to the time of 1066, William the Conqueror and the Magna Carta. And then they tell me that when he writes down the results of his research, the words are so compelling they just jump off the page." So I'm thinking to myself as I'm listening to this, knowing that his description bears no rational relationship to me, I'm thinking that whoever this young man he's describing about, I've only been to Los Angeles 7.5 years, so I'm thinking opportunistically, when this service is over, I'm going to find out who this dude is. Because if he's that good, I want to know him. And then he said, "But I had a chance to meet this young man in his home in Altadena, California the other night." I said, "Oh, Lord." I tried to shrink down into the pew of my church. He says, he told me something about himself. His parents were domestic servants. went on so-and-so, but he has forgotten from whence he came. And then he went on and did something at the time I thought was very unfair. Retrospectively, I thought it was beautiful. There was an actual poem by Langston Hughes called poem was a poem of a letter from mother to son. Langston Hughes, a poet, author, Negro, poet, author. And in the actual poem, he writes about a Negro woman scrubbing a staircase. And she pauses periodically on the staircase and she says, "Don't you give up, son. Life ain't been no crystal stair. Only what Dr. King did, he made my mother the actor in that poem." So it had a powerful effect on me. And when he finished, he said, "Well, I wonder what his parents would think." I'm like, now I started to cry. Okay, church service is over. He was very popular, so he was autographing books at the door to the pulpit. And as I'm walking over, getting near to him, he says, "I never mentioned your name, Mr. Jones. I never mentioned your name, Mr. Jones." And then as I walked over to him close, he says, "Sometimes these Baptist preachers, I never mentioned your name." I didn't say a word. I just walked over to him, and I took my left hand and arm and took my right hand and arm and grabbed his right arm and shoulder and pulled myself close to him, still a little moist from crying, and said, "Dr. King, when do you want me to go to Montgomery, Alabama?" That's what I call the making of a disciple.
He knew when he told that story that you might envision your mother in her uniform.
Oh, yeah.
That he would,
Yeah.
he knew how to bring you close.
Yeah, he sure
and
did.
you did get very close to him. And I want to talk about a few of the stops along your journey. I mentioned the letter from a Birmingham jail because I think most of us have probably read the letter. If you haven't, I invite you to go back and read it in these times. If you haven't read it recently, it requires, I think, a current reading. And when you read it, you think that perhaps someone sat down and wrote it start to finish, maybe made some edits, but that's not true. Dr. King had to write it surreptitiously in bits and pieces.
It was written between, Dr. King was arrested on Friday, April 12th, 1963. It was a Good Friday, April 12th, 1963. And it was a local lawyer, Arthur Shores. He was out of town. And the only people who could go in to see him were me. I mean, his lawyers. And I was his personal lawyer, so I went in to see him. No, I went in to see him. When I went in to see him, I mean, I was going to see him anyway, but I had a specific purpose. Because when I went in to see him, the parents of children who had also been arrested with him, they were screaming. They called me Lawyer Jones, Lawyer Jones. I had this, I don't know, this opprobrious, a heavy moniker of, I'm dressed in tie, a shirt, and everybody else is dressed in overalls and so forth. I had referred to Dr. King's New York lawyer. That cuts both ways, So they were shouting at me, when is he going to get our kids out? So I walk in to see Martin. I said, we got a real problem. I said, these parents are really screaming at us to get them bail money. Now, we were trying to raise.
Can I just interject something?
Yeah.
And we have to remember that not everyone appreciated Dr. King coming to Birmingham. He wasn't from Birmingham.
Oh, yeah.
He was from Atlanta. He was an
No,
outsider.
No. So I go in there trying to deal with the bail question. And he says, you and Harry Belafonte have to deal with this. Have you seen this? So I said, Martin, what is that? I said, you didn't hear me. I said, Bail. Now, he respected me, but this is one of the few times he virtually dismissed me. I said, are you understanding how serious it is? He said, you and Harry have to take care of it. Look at this. So I said, what is that? And what this was a full-page ad from the Birmingham Herald newspaper in which had been signed by some 10 white clergymen in Birmingham. And the substance of the ad was, Dr. King, yes, we Negroes and whites in Birmingham have some issues to work out, but we're working them out. And these things take time, and we don't need you as an outside agitator stirring up things. The best thing you can do is leave town and go home. And they were very critical of him, about how you have to wait, it takes time, you don't know the community, and so blah, 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 blah. So he said, take these and reassemble them, and then give them to whoever the secretary was to do the typing at the time. And so he had, where there were he used blank spaces of old newspapers, toilet paper, paper towels, anything had a blank space. And then he numbered them 1, 2, 3, 4, like the paragraphs, so piles. And I would crunch them up, and I would stick them in my pockets. And he said, now when you come back in, you got to bring me some paper. So that process went on over a period of 5 days, at least till Friday, I know, because I didn't have to leave to work. It was during that process where I came in twice a day with paper under my shirt and took out what he wrote under my shirt. It was a letter from the Birmingham Jail. Now, I was too busy dealing with other things. I never read the letter. I never read anything. It's only like 6 weeks later. I'm in the office. I'm in his office in Atlanta. And his secretary, the same secretary, Dora McDonald, has called me up and said, Dr. King wants you to come be his guest. He says, Christianity in Crisis wants to reprint Martin's letter from the Birmingham Jail, and you handle these things for him, copyright and election. I said, okay. And she says, well, there's a couple of mimeograph copies of it over there. So I sat down at a desk on a couch in Martin's office at the time. And I read the letter. I read the mimeograph copy. And when I read it, I said to myself, oh, my God. I knew the circumstances under which it had been created. I read it. And I'm saying to myself, now he's quoting. Now, I don't give him any credit. I don't give him any credit for quoting verbatim from passages of the Bible. After all, he has a PhD in theology. He's supposed to know the Bible, So I don't give him any credit for that. But the brother is quoting verbatim from poetry, from Hegel, from Schopenhauer, from Aristotle, from John Donne. He's quoting all these things. He's quoting, and he had nothing to refer to. And aside from the accuracy of the information he cites, there is a section of that letter when he says, you think that our action is in Birmingham is untimely. I've never had a situation where I haven't been told what I'm trying to do is untimely. You think we should wait, And then he writes this extraordinary paragraph about wait. Do you know what it is to wait? He describes how, using the generic thing, Negroes driving across country, not knowing where to stop, where they can stop. Every day standing tiptoes, not knowing whether they're going to be addressing a white person properly or not, and having themselves referred to as boy, and having his wife not referred to by her first name. He says, wait, when he goes, beautiful, sarcastic, acerbic description. At the end of this rather powerful description, he says, there comes a time when our cup of endurance runneth over. Wait, we can wait no longer. That's just part of the letter. As I've said to you, and I've said to other people, I can tell you a lot of great speeches and documents, and so I had nothing to do with Dr. King's sermons, by the way. Only speeches and books and chapters and books and so forth. But if I had to give a shorthand bookend of his life, one bookend would be the letter from the Birmingham Jail, and the other bookend would be his April 4th, 1967 speech at the Riverside Church in New York, where the first public opposition to the war in Vietnam, the speech was called Time to Break the Silence, and which, by the way, I drafted this. It was the only time I drafted this speech. The only time Dr. King ever rejected a draft of a speech I wrote was that speech I wrote. You know why?
Why?
First of all, it was a very controversial question. Now, let me take you, this is 1967. So we're having a private, among his advisors, there were 5 or 6 people in the so-called research kitchen cabinet of advisors. There were 2 people, Stanley Levison and myself, who were somewhat regarded as being the first among equals. And we were split. Some people felt that, how can you, Martin, as a civil rights leader, criticize the greatest civil rights president since Abraham Lincoln? How can you criticize the man that helped us get the Voting Rights Bill in 1964 and the Voting Rights Act? You can't do that. With all due respect to William Sloane Coffin and Dr. Spock and all the peace people and the Berrigan brothers, we respect the peace movement, but we cannot criticize Johnson. Now, what the others didn't know, and only Stanley Levison and I knew, was that he had, 2 weeks before this meeting we were talking about, he had received a cabled invitation from a peace group in North Vietnam, inviting him to come to Paris to meet with him. And I, as his lawyer, I thought that's a real problem. I said, I'm not sure you should be speaking out. Certainly you can't go to the meeting. I told Martin privately, discussion of going to Paris is not a subject of public, does that mean? But I said to him, under no circumstances can you go to the meeting. And he says, why? It's a private invitation. He says, Martin, within 5 minutes of the receipt in Paris of that peace group, which they want to, within 5 minutes of the North Vietnam peace group sending you that cable, it was on the desk of the CIA in Washington, D.C. Within 5 minutes, I guarantee you. Oh, no, they don't. They have better things to do. So that was one of my concerns. But anyway, so we were split. And so he said, well, Clarence, since you're so concerned about what I should say, why don't you write a draft of the speech? So I said, okay, I will. So I wrote a draft of the speech about 2 or 3 days, about a day later. I mean, I wrote it very quickly, like 24, 48 hours. Maybe it took me 2 days to write it. And I sent it special delivery, so maybe, and he calls me up on the phone. And he said, what is this? I said, what do you mean? He said, I thought you were my radical. I said, well, I think I am. He said, what do you mean? He said, you start your speech, you start my proposed speech like, you set out the facts, as I know you would, very accurately, but then you say, but on the other hand, and then you write another paragraph, which contradicts or counterbalances what you said in the first paragraph. And you'll go back and forth on the one hand, on the other hand. He says, Clarence, the Vietnam War is either morally right or morally wrong. He said, I can't use this. And he says, you're like my conscience. He says, I got to go and counsel with Vincent Harding. Vincent Harding was a Mennonite preacher, very brilliant guy. The bottom line is that the actual draft of the speech, Time to Break the Silence, was a joint effort between Reverend Vincent Harding and Martin Luther King Jr. And when I got their speech, because they wanted me to read it before, I read the speech and I called Martin up and I said, he said, what do you think? So I said, well, before I make any comments, I said, are you sure you want to say what you say? Now, I was raised by Irish Catholic nuns, that's how I learned English grammar. So I use things like topic sentence. I said, the topic sentence in the 20th paragraph, that's the way you start. The topic sentence in the 20th paragraph, you say, the United States today is the greatest purveyor of violence in the world, period. I said, you sure you want to show that? He says, well, it's true. And I said, well, I think you ought to put the sentence in the middle of another paragraph, which is exactly what he did. The speech, I have to say, I urge you, that speech is kick-ass speech. What do you think about it? I mean, it was what we're going to get into later. You know why? What that speech posed and what the problem we're facing today? There are no two sides of the question of morality.
There are not two sides of the question whether something is right or wrong. There's only one side. And one of the problems in the legacy of his, next April will be the 50th anniversary. 50 years since his death, next April, okay? One of the problems we face today is moral relativism. One of the problems we face today, there seems to be, aside from being fake news, there's nothing so simple as right or wrong. There's nothing so simple, I won't say simple, there's nothing so clear as moral or immoral. Now hold on. We're going to be talking about the legacy of this brother. He never got that confused. Never. In fact, that was his compass in writing and then publicly speaking about the war in Vietnam. He simply felt, well, on the practical side, he saw that Lyndon Johnson was selling the African American community and the general community what we call a bill of goods, because there's no way you can really do a war on poverty if you're taking 70% of the treasury and building bombs. One of the things he says in the speech, 70% of the treasury of the United States that would otherwise be available for the war on poverty is being used for armaments in Vietnam. So the war in Vietnam is not going to sell. So this question, one of the most challenging aspects of his legacy is there seems to be some either unclarity or some confusion as to what issues we are confronted with, as to whether when we propose different resolutions of those issues, as to whether initially there's some benchmark about whether we should do something or not do something. So, Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan uses a phrase which I use in my course, and I often quote it over television. Everybody's entitled to their own opinion, but not entitled to their own set of facts. Well, as we are in this 21st century, 2017, putting fake news aside, that's just an irrelevant discussion. Something is either factually exists or factually, the speed of light is 186,000 miles per second. 2 and 2 equals 4. The Earth, the circumference of the Earth is approximately 26,000 miles. It goes one. Those facts have been established. Those facts have been established. So, do you really have to wonder whether or not it's moral to want to consider a reasonable ban on the purchase and sale of guns? You think that's an immoral question? You think that's a difficult question? Do you think? Now hold on. You don't have to have a mastery of algorithms. You don't have to have any, expensive, high educated math. But if you know basic arithmetic, what kind of government decides that it is going to give billions and billions of dollars of tax breaks for rich people who don't need it in order to take away health benefits for people who do need it? Now that's not... No. That at first blush may be seen as a mathematical, economic problem, but no, it's not. It's a moral question. What government does that? And what we have to ask ourselves, and we don't have enough time to do that, It ain't about Hillary. It ain't about a Trump or collusion. It's about us. It's about us. So if Martin King were here, he would say, now we got to always keep our moral compass. And we also have to know how to count. Now, when we crossed that Edmund Pettus Bridge in 1965 to get the right to vote, and Reverend Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act in 1965, with all due respect to the Citizens United decision allowing money to have it and so forth, there's still the opportunity to vote. There is still the opportunity to vote, okay? So what am I to think as a former person active in the civil rights movement and a lawyer for Dr. King, when I'm watching television and I'm seeing some protesters being around Trump Tower and they're being interviewed, these people are protesting Trump, and somebody says, well, who did you vote for? Well, I didn't vote. Then they ask somebody else, did you vote? Oh, no, I haven't voted. Excuse me, just to where one was a white girl and one was a young black man. So I'm thinking to myself, and I'm not being overdramatic, I'm just being factual. Tears started to come down my cheek. Now I'm saying, now this doesn't compute. You know, these people are protesting, and they don't know that people died, were murdered in order to get the right to vote. So he would say one of the major commands, as I said, the first one is keep clearly a distinction between what is moral and what is immoral. And secondly, cut through all the chatter in the news. When you deal with the potential of political change, just remember the most important tool of political change is the right to vote. And so anybody who doesn't like the current policies, one, doesn't have a voter registration card, two, is not registered to vote, and three, does not vote, then should shut your mouth and don't say anything, because you deserve to get the government that you get.
Let's bring the audience
Yes.
into the discussion, but before we do, I just want to share with the audience something that they may not know. We've talked about this many times.
Yes.
Your relationship with Dr. King is documented for a very ironic and unusual reason.
Right.
Every phone call that you had with Dr. King, it turns out was recorded
Hello.
and transcribed and kept in a very thick file
Yeah.
at the FBI. And you have
Boxes.
been able, through a FOIA
In fact,
request,
the book
to
that David
obtain all
Garrow,
that.
the book that David Garrow wrote on Martin Luther King Jr., he was able to write that because I was able to give him authorization to see my FBI file. He couldn't get the initial clearance from the King estate because Dr. King was dead, but I was alive, as a live person. Okay, let me just tell you. By the way, when we would have conference calls discussing major issues, and I would, after having two martinis earlier in the evening and maybe a little Jack Daniels before the call, the calls would start around 10:30 at night. There'll be Andy Young on the call, myself, Stanley Levison, and a couple of other people. We were talking about policies, and I would already start the call because I was the person who initiated and arranged the calls. And says, everybody here, we do and so forth. And I says, now, just before we start, I says, I said, Mr. FBI or Miss FBI person, are you all ready? And Martin would say to me, Clarence, would you stop this nonsense? You go, as I said, I may have.
He really didn't believe that he was being recorded.
As a matter of fact, he said, sometimes you act like a left-wing McCarthyite. He said, you think the FBI's, don't they know they have better things to do? Well, excuse me. From July 13th, 1963 to December 31st, 1967, when Attorney General, when Ramsey Clark became Attorney General, listen to me, every single telephone call that took place between Martin Luther King Jr. and myself, every single one, home to home, office to office, officer, every single one was wiretapped, transcribed, put in a file, and marked top secret. Every meeting we had, publicly or wherever they could secrete a telephono lens, was the subject of telephono, everything. So, you know, when I did my first book with HarperCollins, it was called What Would Martin Say? And the editors, the senior editor got into the question about, I couldn't verify something I said took place. He said, well, no, we got to be careful. You're a lawyer, Clarence, you have to understand. We can't independently confirm. I said, but I'm telling you I was there. He actually said this at this place, at this time. I know it. Well, you can't. So I said, so I go home and look in the FBI file. The issue was whether or not he said a certain thing. And he was at the Fairmont Hotel in San Francisco on a certain day in July 1965, okay, when he gave a major speech about the least of these. So I went to the FBI file. There it is. There it is. Transcript of the conference, transcript of the call between Martin King and myself. He's at the Fairmont Hotel, I'm in New York, and we're going over it. Okay. So I bring it in, and I said, here it is. Okay. Now so I got a little humorous in my forward and acknowledgments. So I acknowledged publicly, with gratitude, the FBI. Okay. Now I got to tell you, I had a chance to go in and visit with former director, FBI James Comey, and that's a whole nother. We met for an hour and a half, but underneath the glass desktop, underneath the glass on his desk, his chair sits here and there's a glass here. Underneath the corner of the desk, there's a photostatic copy of the memo from former Attorney General Robert Kennedy, from former FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, to then, in 1963, Attorney General Robert Kennedy, asking for the authorization to wiretap Martin Luther King Jr. And there is the counter signature of Robert Kennedy approving the wiretap. Former Director Comey says, I keep this so that every new hire we have when he comes to my office, I make sure that they see that memo. And when we have meetings with our agents, periodically, I remind them and I say, we never want the agency to ever become that again. So this is, now former Director James Comey doesn't need my endorsement, but I can tell you something. And I said this to Sally Yates, in fact, the other night, and I said it to Eric Holder too. I said, yeah, I remember Janet Reno was an FBI director, and she was Attorney General. I remember FBI director, but listen, as far as in my lifetime, the only credible FBI director of impeccable integrity was James Comey.
We're going to bring the audience into the discussion.
Right.
We have a microphone, and they will pass the mic. Why don't we start right here?
Right.
This has been one of the most inspiring. I've been to Aspen 5 times, and it's been one of the greatest sessions ever.
Thank you very much.
For both of you.
No, we're not finished. This is just the beginning. Thanks to her.
As an 18-year-old kid, I was lucky enough to march with Dr. King through the streets of Roxbury outside of Boston. And we were all given a sheet to read beforehand of how we should handle ourselves, because the folks at Roxbury had been in the busing thing and they were going to be very hostile. But the thing that I remember at the beginning, it was the most inclusive thing I ever felt in my life in terms of the love that was spread, black, white, everything. And how have we lost that?
Wait,
What happened? That sense of we're all in this together.
Thank you for your question, because not just along racial divisions, but also political divisions. We are a deeply divided country, and the parties have to figure out how to talk to each other. So Clarence, do you have any
yeah, I have
advice
some
on that?
I think that's a very astute observation. In fact, I think that his general comment about the so-called social justice, the civil rights movement today, he would be very, very dismayed by the apparent absence of what were major leaders and major components of our social justice movement and the civil rights. Substantial number of white people, white youth, and let me break it down. Among those whites, a substantial number of Jewish people. It saddens me because I was there and I was an active part of it. And I've said this to I've said this to my Jewish contemporaries, lawyers and other people, Palo Alto, that one of the things that enabled the success of the civil rights movement was a coalition of the African American and the white community during that period. And that part of the white community that was most active was the Jewish community. So where are they? Second thing, I said, now I know the labor movement is not as large as it was before, but there seems to be an absence of labor speaking out. And then the thing I have the most criticism of, and I was very refreshed this earlier today when I went and heard Adam Hamilton. You know the Hamilton, right? Yeah, I was very. By the way, he's invited me. He's invited me to come and preach and resurrect. You know I'm going to do that, right?
Bishop Hamilton,
Huh?
yes, yes.
Go ahead, okay. But what I'm trying to say is that, we wouldn't have been able to pass the Civil Rights Bill in 1964 with the active participant of religious leaders. I'm talking about the National Council of Churches, the Congregation of Jewish Synagogues, a whole group, National Baptist Convention. We had a whole group of active religious leaders. Where are they? Where are they? Now, I have to tell you, last year, I was right at the same place, right in Aspen. I had a chance to meet for about 3 or 4 hours with the leaders of the Black Lives Matter movement. About 6, maybe about 10 of them, and just me, just sit in the room. I think it was actually in the cook room. We met for about 2.5, almost 3 hours. And during part of the discussion, I said, the reason I'm telling you this, I said to them, when we, meaning Dr. King and the Civil Rights Movement, when we marched and did what we did, enabling the passage of, 64 Civil Rights Act, Voting Rights Act, and all of the changes, the I Have a Dream speech, and raising the level of the consciousness of America about ending racial segregation, we genuinely believe that what we were doing would make unnecessary what you're doing today. I said that. And do you know one of those young women came over to me and burst into tears? And she says, well, Dr. Jones, are you saying that you think you failed? I said, no. I'm just telling you that that's what we believed. And I said, for you to be successful from where we left off, there were certain things that you need to learn from Dr. King's legacy. And the most important thing I want to share with you is this question of violence, okay? And I said, he was spiritually committed to nonviolence. persons like me, I was not committed to nonviolence. I was pragmatic. In fact, we don't have time for that, but when I first joined Martin Luther King Jr., I made it very clear I was not committed to nonviolence. You know, I was 29 years old. I'd just been in the United States Army, and my attitude was, a white dude hits me, he's going down. Oh, Clarence, you can't do that. I said, well, I will. He says, that's why I can't have you in any demonstration. Well, I wasn't. The point is, but I said to them. So I got in, I had my own come to Jesus movement. Particularly in 1967, I came to understand, I came really committed that that's the baddest man on earth, and I will follow him to the end of the earth, nonviolently, because I just had my own personal transformation. But the point I said to them, I said, let me tell you why nonviolence is so effective. I'm not going to try to spend a lot of time trying to persuade you philosophically or spiritually. That you have to do on your own. But I'm going to tell you why the use of nonviolence is so powerful politically. Because if you have a powerful movement, if you have a movement and a powerful message, the first thing the people who are opposed to your message will try to do is to provoke and incite you to violence. You know why? Because they want the violence to obscure the substance of your message. Okay? So you don't even have to be personally committed to nonviolence. You can be as bad as I am. When I was younger. But you have to be politically. And I said, that was the genius of Martin Luther King Jr. That was his genius. Now,
I want to just make sure we can get a couple other questions.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, forgive me for taking up your time.
No. Because we're tight on time. What I'm going to do is we're going to do something unusual.
We're tight on time. You just tell the people to wait the next people to come in here.
So we're going to we're going to do sort of a speed round, and we're going to pass the mic and ask the questions. Bill, you've seen me do this before, so you know what we're doing. We're going to ask a series of questions one by one, and then we'll get them answered. So right here, and then we'll go back to Nathaniel, Bill, then Nathaniel, and then we'll come to you too.
Sorry? Oh, okay, thank you. First, with all due respect, you a bad cat, okay? My question is, it's a two-part question.
Right.
The first is, when you were talking about the moral piece, could you unpack where you pulled your strength from and others to be able to step into that space, to stand on what's right and what's wrong? And then the second part, when we look at the voting and the example you gave about folks who haven't voted, but they're protesting, how can we step into that space to be able to bring them into the fold of understanding the power of their vote?
Okay, so hold on. So where'd you get the moral strength from, your
Yeah.
moral core, and how do we encourage people to vote? Hold on to that. Number two.
Yes, and I'm also going to ask a question about morality, which is, you spoke so eloquently about the need to talk about these political issues as moral issues, and it feels like the right has done that very well, and the other side hasn't. How do we get that back into the political discourse? I haven't heard too many people besides the Reverend Dr. William Barber speak about these
Oh, please,
issues.
that is the baddest brother walking together.
Yeah,
Okay,
he's amazing.
So how do you inject a strong moral argument on the left or in a progressive argument? Hold on to that, and we're.
As a caveat to my question, I don't live in the United States, but are children in your schools still being taught the legacy of Dr. King to the same extent perhaps they were 20 or 30 years ago? In other words, are you happy or satisfied with the history that's being passed down?
Okay, and then we're going to add one other one right here, and then we're going to try to get through these. And so hold on just one second.
Good afternoon. I am a small part of an effort with the King Center to reenact the funeral march on the
You
anniversary.
say King Center in Atlanta?
Yes. Next April. And I just want to issue an invitation for you to be involved. It's recently been formed, and so we're trying to get people like yourselves involved in the effort.
So let's start with Nathaniel's question, two parts. Where did you find your moral core?
I found my moral core early on. really I have to owe it to the Irish nuns and my mother. When I was about 11 years old, when I was about 11 years old, I was chased on a bicycle when my parents were working at the shore. And I'd never heard these words before, people chased on a bicycle. I came crying back to my mother because I'd heard people telling me to get off that bike, and they called me names like jigaboo, monkey, gorilla, sambo, nigger, and all that stuff. And I'd never heard that because I'd been in this boarding school. And I run into my mother, and I said, and I'm crying, and I said, Mama, this is what they did to me. She says, come over here and look in the mirror. And so she says, tell me, what do you see? And I'm crying, and I said, Mama, I see you, I see me. She says, tell me, what do you see? So she's talking harshly at me, I'm thinking. So I'm still crying. I said, Mama, I see you, I see. She says, no, what you see is the most beautiful thing that God has created. Pay no mind what those boys called you. Mama loves you. God loves you. Now listen to me now, and you are beautiful. Mama loves you. God loves you, and you are beautiful. Now, when I was in the Catholic boarding school, the nuns would say, Master Jones, God loves you. Be a good boy. God loves you. You're good. And I had a sister, Mary Patricia, she would say, oh, Master Jones, you were such a beautiful young boy. We love you. I go, now you know, I mean, this is from 6 to like 14. I mean, I feel sorry that other young, I didn't understand why I was deprived from, I was not an orphan. Most of the people there were orphans. I had some, but I was the first, and I had my parents, but they just put me this. I didn't understand why. But that grounded me. That grounded me with a sense of confidence, and being with Martin King sort of was the icing on the cake, because sometimes he would talk to me, but more than that, I would travel with him, and he would embarrass me because I never liked to, I'd like to sit where you're sitting, but he'd say, no, come up here, and he'd be sitting, and I'd be sitting on the pulpit, and I was very uncomfortable. I didn't be sitting on the pulpit, And I had listened to this brother preach, and he could preach. And he would often talk about right and wrong. Now, I'd be disingenuous if I didn't tell you that I fell short in some instances. I don't want you to look at me as a saint. I'm still a work in progress.
Aren't we all?
Okay? I'm 86 years old, going on 87. Okay? But I'm still trying.
So the
But you
second
can't
part-
but the key thing, I was fortunate enough to get that grounding in my spine, to get a sense of self-confidence and a sense of really what is right from wrong.
So how do you teach people that voting is right and necessary and a responsibility no matter where they fall on the political spectrum?
My way of talking to them is really about power. The question is, do you want to participate in enabling the exercise of power over things that can make your life worse or better? Or do you want to just completely relinquish that to somebody else? And so I say voting is the most effective political tool. It's a tool. Frederick Douglass says, power concedes nothing without a demand. Never has, it never will. And for all of those, if some of you might get discouraged, listen, you can run all the money you want in ads, okay? But feet, and a registration card, I'll take feet and a registration card and a healthy enough body to get to vote any day, okay? And don't worry, listen, yes, we have to call out insanity. You know what we have is, what we
Say that
have,
again, we have to call out
we
insanity.
have to call out insanity because we have unfortunately, we have a 71-year-old man that has a 17-and-a-half-year-old petulant teenager encased in his body. Okay?
Now,
But this too shall pass.
and we have to remember, Aspen is a bipartisan.
Aspen is nonpartisan, but I'm not nonpartisan. I'm partisan as hell. I'm mad as hell. As I said, I'm mad as hell. I'm not going to take it anymore.
So, Bill's question for those on the left in progressive movements who feel that they are unable to articulate a message that's built around morality, if you could quickly talk about how that might happen or why it doesn't happen.
To my friends on the left, and I have many of them. By the way, my mentor coming up politically was Paul Robeson. Now, I'm just telling you, that was my mentor. In fact, I told Martin Luther King Jr. when I met him, I said, listen, you're the second baddest dude I ever met since Paul Robeson. I told Harry Belafonte this. I said, Paul Robeson was a bad dude. Anyway, what was your question?
The morality on the left.
The morality
The question
on the left.
of building a message around a moral
Excuse
compass and a moral calling.
Excuse me. I would like to think, having spent most of my life ideologically committed to the left, I would think that of those people who are most committed to morality, it would be those people on the left. Strike that. No, I want to say that. All people should be committed, okay? But those who have been in progressive direct action struggle, we should be the active persons who raise our voices the loudest, who make as much noise as possible. Okay? We have to say it's not enough to say, well, that's a bad bill, that's a good bill. We have to say, at the end of the day, the question is, what kind of nation morally permits something to happen? Forget about whether it's politically expedient. What kind of nation morally will permit something like this to happen? That's what you have to say. Raise the moral question every time, every day, 24/7.
And the question of whether Dr. King is adequately taught in schools.
No,
Do we
please.
fully understand him?
Well, I'm trying as best as I can. I'm trying. No, the answer is no. In fact, one of the things that concerns me is that there is a whole generation of people who the only thing they know about Dr. King is the King holiday. You know?
And that he had a dream.
And that he had a dream. And I was on a bus several years ago, about 15 years ago in Westchester County, on the King holiday, and 3 African-American women got on, I think African-American girls, got on. They said, well, this is a King holiday. We're going to go shopping, you know? So the bus driver, a Negro bus driver says, well, you know, this is Martin Luther King's holiday. He said, yeah, we're glad for the holiday because we can go shopping. So I thought, well, they're teenagers. They should. But then I thought, I said, you know, somebody in their school or in their family must at least take them. They can still go shopping, but they need to know something about what the holiday means. So one of the great shortfalls in our education system, particularly in our K through 12, is the absence of teaching about Martin Luther King Jr. And this is a whole separate discussion about what I call the institution of slavery. You cannot understand racist America today unless you understand the institution of slavery and its concomitant ideological doctrine of white supremacy. If you don't know that, then it's all bullshit. Excuse me, Christian.
You have an invitation from someone over here, and I'm going to let you take that up privately with her to talk about what you plan to do in April.
Oh, yes. April 4th, April 4th, I'm one of the keynote speakers at the Lorraine Hotel at the in Nashville, Tennessee.
So I'll let you take up that invitation with her,
Yeah,
but
but
we're
aside
so
from that,
glad
right.
that you accepted the invitation to be with us today. This has been an extraordinary afternoon. Clarence Jones, thank you so very much.